And I get a lot of grief when I talk about them, and I don't know why. We're not using them to diagnose, but we're using them to get a visual map of inflammation. So that's one way to know that there's a ton of inflammation, sort of
In the
corralled
pelvis.
in that pelvic area.
Right.
And it's
That's
an
brilliant.
incredible tool to
Mm-hmm.
use. And so these are two tools that we use in practice. Now, if we bring in Eastern medicine and older systems of medicine, they had their tools too, looking at the tongue, looking at pulse, getting a sense of what's going on there. So when we're trying to educate or even trying to make decisions, of where do we begin? And I would, I've done that all day today here, like talking to patients. Where do you begin? Because there's inflammation, there's hormone balancing, there's your gut, there's your liver, there's nutrients. There are all these ideas, right? There is your emotional bandwidth and emotional well-being, right? All of them are involved in this concept of inflammation. So if we're going to start and we decide that based on lab work and imaging and your history and everything else, if inflammation is really where we need to begin, then that is doing a lot of gut work to bring the inflammatory load down. And then it is using things like, diet cleanup, adding in things like turmeric, omega-3 fats, so many different great anti-inflammatories that are out there to bring those numbers down. And then we track them and we trend them. And sometimes we get even more aggressive. Honestly, we'll move on from that and we'll do things like glutathione, which is an antioxidant, brings inflammation down. And there are ways to do that both just orally or via IV. That makes a huge difference for our patients. And then we've even used low-dose naltrexone in an attempt to bring the inflammation down as well.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw something at you that I mentioned to some of my colleagues here in the fertility space. And I have been using, following the pandemic, serapeptase.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And I don't understand fully the mechanism. It was something I knew of from having endometriosis. And I know that's good for reducing adhesions.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of got this intuitive hit that to give it to my patients who are suspected endo or silent endo, or they've been treated for endo, but clearly they have that phlegm, heat, damp, blood stasis, cold intermingling, hot mess of a pelvis. If I gave them just a low dose of serapeptase and put it with a little bit of vitamin K2, the miscarriages stopped.
Interesting.
And I think it's because it moved some of the microclots out of the small blood vessels of the lining and surrounding the ovaries and the testes. And then the K2 helped to remove any potential like plaques or calcifications in there. And they were already taking fish oil. So then the blood was thinner.
Yep.
And I think it was a magic.
Ooh, I'm gonna have to use that on
patients. So do you use
So,
serapeptase?
I haven't been using serapeptase. That's not one I've been using.
I think, but you perked up when I mentioned it. Is it one that you're familiar with?
It is one I'm familiar with, and I've been reading a lot about it, but I haven't used it the way you're using it in the fertility setting.
But it's got some anti-inflammatory properties.
Definitely.
And it seems to be good at breaking down adhesions. It was supposed to be like used in the lungs, but then it's being used on endometriosis. So I knew that it was going to target those structures, and it helped me get over pain. And some of my endo patients, they have benefited from it. So I figured, hey, instead of having a fourth or fifth loss, why don't we try it?
Yeah. And it's been successful. That's incredible.
Yep. Knock on wood.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Yeah. I mean, these are how we figure these things out. And this is the nature of integrative medicine. I loved that you said the emotional piece is a part of inflammation. I think knowing that you are a Western MD at the core, and to honor the emotions shows the Eastern medicine, your personal journey. And that is so understated as a factor in these hormone problems and fertility issues. I think it's because it's seemingly too hard to wrangle those emotions.
Right.
But what I learned with the SEED program and this observing them cyclically is women are actually very predictable with their emotions and their mindsets based on how much estrogen, how much progesterone.
Happy dark.
Exactly. Exactly. And
Yeah.
flowing through, like
Right.
feeling full of potential,
Right.
feeling vulnerable, feeling
Right.
out of balance.
Totally. I think I experienced that personally. I know my patients experience that as well too. And I think I've got to credit older systems, exactly, Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine, for understanding the emotional and the energetic body. I wouldn't have understood it. But I think I've told you, like, we do all the scanning. We've even brought it here, right? We do like vibrational energy scans to really read the emotional body more than for any other reason. And we do the AccuRef to get like sort of that more data driven, meridian analysis, because not every practitioner that works with me has done a deep dive into Chinese medicine. But at least here now, we can show them and we can actually show the patient where these worlds collide, right? So you have the spleen meridian. Well, what's the emotion with the spleen?
Worrying,
worry,
overthinking.
Right? Overthinking and worry. So we can tell the patient that, and they're like, they're not going to get it all. They don't get everything the first go round, but we plant that seed of like, hey, this stuff is interconnected. And then even on our vibrational scans, you'll see things like, there's a category for inflammation, there's a category for hormones, there's a category for different things. Sometimes under inflammation, the first thing showing up is grief or trauma.
Right.
Or under hormones, the first thing showing up is anger. So then we are able to open the door to that conversation that while this is physical, it is being driven by these emotional patterns. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's the other way around, right? Like something's really wrong, like something physically is off. And that's where we have to focus to get the emotions where they need to be.
That's causing them to be so upset.
Right.
Right. Endometriosis, I'm going back to that because that pelvic inflammation flaring up, causing the nervous system to be upregulated, and then the upregulation causing her to eat poorly.
Right. I think my daughter's dealing with this right now. Honestly, it's in our family, PCOS and endometriosis. And, when you were saying serapeptase, I was like, I might start her on that. But yes, there is this, it's an inflammatory disease. And I think it's the root of even the IC and the interstitial cystitis and all of that, SIBO, like all these different things that we deal with. And it needs a gentle approach, right? It doesn't need a sledgehammer approach. It needs a really gentle approach of healing the gut and moving the energy. I'd be curious how you deal with many of your endo patients.
Well, a holistic approach to healing endo, that's exactly what you're describing. It's not just take out the endo.
Right.
We have to address the emotions. We have to address the gut. So I'm talking to Dr. Larry Orbach, endometriosis excision surgeon, and he takes a holistic approach. So amazing. That's another episode.
Yeah, it's amazing.
But it's really good. We're seeing so much better outcomes when we do treat holistic. So there is hope. But here's another wild thought.
Yes.
I'm going to run this by Larry Orbach, but the microplastics. I recently had endometriosis surgery for a third time.
Oh, no.
And he described an apron when he went in. I had all of it removed, but he found an apron of like gauze. And I was thinking, I wonder if that is microplastics leaching through the intestine and forming a little sheath. And he was able to see it in there, because the rest of the endo had already been removed 17 years prior. So I'm going to talk to him about that, but I want to talk to you about microplastics and endocrine disruptors.
Yes. So, endocrine disruptors we're very concerned about. I do feel like they're often that and many of our environmental concerns are at the root of a lot of the hormone imbalances we're seeing. I think many of them are also obesogens, right? So they actually drive obesity and weight gain and things like that. And we're seeing those really impact children younger and younger and younger. And again, we both believe in this foundational approach to hormone balance where everything is building upon itself. You don't just arrive at a point and be like, oh my gosh, this happened to me, right? So the concern with endocrine disruptors, which are in our food, our body
Clothing,
care, our clothing, our
products.
home products, or carpets, or paint, all these different places, is that the liver, back to the liver, can't do the job it's supposed to do. We have a boggy liver, we have poor detox pathways, and we have basically compounds and substances that mimic hormones floating around in our body. And so it's triggering everything from early puberty in our children, right? Girls going into puberty much earlier, to the androgenization of girls, meaning they're having more and more of sort of these male derivative hormones, the high DHT, the high, DHEAS, testosterone, all of those, to the estrogenization of our boys, where they're having more stored estrogen. So it's very much disrupting the hormone axis, or this feedback loop that we talk about.
And causing weight gain from the
Yes.
hyperestrogenization
Definitely.
of girls
Definitely.
and perimenopausal women. So what do we do about that?
Everyone asks me that question, like, okay, is it all gloom and doom? Do we go high? Do we live in a bubble? I think it begins with owning your personal chemistry. I think that's the first part.